Welcome to the Veritas Podcast. I'm Scott Veritas here with my co-host Ben Rebellis. We enjoyed a little bit of an end of year / holiday break. We did miss you for a couple of weeks there, but we're back here with our first episode of 2023. And what a way to start off the year, but with the immolation of a poor man who has suffered a lot in his life and is constantly talking about his suffering and his pain. That is the Prince of Wales, Harry, of the Windsor family. I don't know if they have a last name. We don't really follow the royal family that closely, Ben and I, but we do want to talk about them today because Prince Harry came out with a memoir called Spare, which is apparently the title comes from him having been referred to as sort of a spare for his older brother William when he was younger, which does sound kind of mean, to be honest. But in any case, he came out with this memoir, which is it is a complainy, whiny memoir, to put it simply. And, Prince Harry, who definitely has experienced at least one very real tragedy in his life. His mother died when he was very young. But beyond that, a pretty charmed life by, I think, any stretch of the imagination. There's also a Netflix series that just came out, I believe, called Harry and Meghan, about Prince Harry and his lovely wife, Meghan Markle, who I'm sure you're all big fans of. And we wanted to talk about everything going on with the royal family, not in so much of a gossipy way, although it will be hard for me to hide my opinions of this lovely couple, Harry and Meghan, at times, because I've always kind of had a thing. I didn't know much about Harry, but I've always known a few things about Meghan Markle. But we wanted to talk about it because we think it actually exemplifies a lot of things that are relevant to kind of wokeness and the culture war and things that we talk about often on the show, namely victimhood culture. I think that you have two of the luckiest people in the world, particularly Meghan, who was not born into the royal family, who kind of fell into it. She was not a spectacularly famous person. She had one supporting role on a show called Suits that I had never heard of, but was apparently kind of a big show. I looked it up. It's never been nominated for anything, but it seemed to have a decent audience. It ran for 6 or 7 seasons. But other than that, she had almost no acting credits that were particularly notable before meeting Harry. But before we get into Meghan Markle, I do want to talk about Prince Harry. So this memoir, Spare, I have not read it. I don't always read entire books before I come on the show because, frankly, it seems like it would be kind of painful. But I did read and listen to some excerpts from the book, and it is just so whiny, and it's very gossipy in regards to Harry's family, one of the most important families in the world, arguably the most important family in the Western world. Certainly, if you're in the UK, they would kind of top the list. And it really does nothing for him, and I'm not entirely sure what he was going for. If you look at public opinion polling of the opinions of the royal family and of Harry specifically since he started dating Meghan Markle, you see that his reputation collapses during his relationship with Markle and appears to have collapsed more. Now, this book is selling very well. He's probably going to make a decent amount of money from it. Not that he's hurting for cash, although he has claimed to, despite the fact that he's worth something like, I think, $30 to $50 million. Maybe not a whole lot by the standards of the royal family, but an awful lot of money by most standards. This book, the way that I would describe it more than anything, if I could describe it in one word, it would be oversharing. And that is portrayed no better than in a clip that most of you probably saw on Twitter or on Matt Walsh's show or Ben Shapiro's show, which was a clip in which Harry, and I'll just give it to you straight, is talking about having frostbite on his penis during a trip to, I can't remember if it was the South or North Pole, probably the South Pole. And it's kind of neither here nor there. He gets frostbite on his pole. And in the process, he takes some advice from a friend who says to apply a certain type of Vaseline cream-like thing onto it. I forget the name of it. But he shares in the book, and I just don't know what possessed him to share this. But I do want to mention it because I think it speaks a little bit to his mental state, his insecurities, what might have allowed him to marry someone like Meghan Markle. And again, nothing but sympathy to Harry for what happened to him when he was very young with Princess Diana. But he shares that this cream that he was recommended to apply for penile frostbite reminded him of his mom because she used to put it on her lips. And right after mentioning this, and by the way, he says, I opened the tube and I was transported back to like a room in which my mother was there. Like he goes so far as to say that, and then immediately transitions to, and then I put it on my penis. Now, I haven't heard or seen what comes after this part of the book, I don't know exactly what he says next.
Know?
I don't really. Yeah.
Most stories that start with putting lotion on penis, I really don't need to know the ending.
Yeah, and especially if it's a lotion that distinctly reminds you of your deceased mother, and that you go out of your way to tell people really reminds you of your mom. There not a whole lot more to say about that other than obviously this is a person with deeply seated issues. I do have a lot of sympathy for him to lose your mom very young, a very tragic and awful thing, regardless of whatever fortunes you may have had in your life. I'm very sympathetic to that. But I give this example only to say that it's not the only problem with this book. Another thing in this book is that it's riddled with inaccuracies. Supposedly, there's at least one thing in the book that is a very clear and obvious lie, and that is that Prince Harry claims that his mom, who I'm sure was a lovely lady, I know there are lots of people who are fans of Princess Diana, but that she got him a Nintendo Wii when he was younger as a gift, and a Netflix subscription, despite the fact that these things did not exist until 10 years after her death. And so it's things like that that bring into question the veracity of the meat of the book, which is him complaining about the royal family and their treatment of him. He claims that they were, I don't know if abusive is the right word, but just unkind, let's say, to him throughout his youth, referring to him as the spare to his brother William, who is, of course, the heir to the throne. He is second in line, right? Yes. Or I guess maybe not anymore. Like if he were still in the royal family, he'd be second in line. But, he claims that he always kind of played second fiddle to William, that William at some point like body slammed him or something.
Yeah.
He claims that there was some kind of physical altercation, says some things I think about Kate Middleton. He claims that people were racially insensitive or maybe even racist towards his wife, Meghan, who apparently, by the way, is half black, which is something that I would not have known in a trillion years unless it was made, into such a big deal by Meghan herself. She's mentioned the fact, I think people are being racist towards me. She very clearly passes as white. Anyone can look up a picture of Meghan Markle if you haven't seen her. She looks like she could maybe be Latina or something. She doesn't look black, really. But to be fair, she is of mixed race descent. I think her mom was black, so she is half black. All of this is to say the whininess and the oversharingness and the gossipiness of this memoir, combined with things that Meghan has done in the past, the way she has sort of destroyed Harry and almost seems to have destroyed the royal family, it makes me think of wokeness, particularly when you think of it through the lens of victimhood culture. But before I sort of continue on my soapbox, Ben, I want to give you a chance to jump in. What did you make of what you've seen from this memoir? And if you've seen any clips from the Netflix series, I didn't watch the Netflix series, but I watched a couple of clips.
No. First, a disclaimer. I do not care about the royal family. I personally think monarchy is stupid. Curtis Yarvin, come at me, bro. But it's so hard to bring myself to care about these people. I watched a clip with Harry and Anderson Cooper, I think is on his book tour interview circuit. And Harry's just airing these family complaints that all normal people have. Listen, I have an estranged brother, and his estrangement has brought enormous strife to my family for 5 or 6 years. Every family has strife. Every family has dysfunction. I don't care about these people's dysfunctions. Maybe I'm weird. I don't care about the Kardashians' dysfunction. I don't care about the Real Housewives' dysfunction, although admittedly my fiance does, and I kind of do when I've had a little tequila and I'm just sitting on the couch. But this seems to me an attempt to monetize that family dysfunction, which it seems is appropriate for TLC and Honey Boo Boo, but it seems very weird with someone with such prestige as these people. I thought they were supposed to be dignified. They were supposed to be royalty. Why am I hearing about these banal squabbles? But I think the word that, I don't remember exactly the word you used, Scott, but the word that I get from all I'm reading about this is pettiness. There's so much pettiness surrounding this. And maybe it's because the subject's so shallow. It's just some people who were born into this aristocracy, and that's really the only special thing about them. One question that kind of was running through my mind is, would we have seen something like this 20, 50 years ago? I mean, Harry's not the first person that isn't in the direct royal line of succession. But we haven't seen the tell-alls from all of the prior non-king princes who who complaining about the fact that they're the spare child. And it's not until 2022 that we have this. And I think you're kind of right here. The wokeness and the narcissism and the victimhood is what's motivating people to get out there and do this. And I don't know about the money situation. This seems to me to be a money grab, a documentary on top of a book, because I don't know what former royals do for money. I don't think they would denigrate themselves to go work at a trading desk at Goldman Sachs or whatever is open to people like that. So this seems to be a moment spawned of, well, our current moment, the current thing that's inspiring this kind of whiny pettiness out in public of someone who's supposed to be this austere public royal.
Yeah, and the victimhood, the perpetual aggrievement of this particular individual comes off as so confusing because he has so much control over his own life. He is, to my knowledge, in pretty good health. I know at one point he was in the British Air Force. He, on top of that, has still a very good amount of money. I know that there's some extent to which he's been cut off from the royal fortune, but he still has, I think, a good amount of money. And you know, he had the ability to really go out and do anything he might have wanted to do in the world. I don't think the royal family would have objected if he had become, at least if it had been done in somewhat of a tasteful manner, maybe a musician, an actor. I mean, he did join the Air Force for a little while. To be fair, he did something that I genuinely give him credit for, which is he served his country. But beyond that, he just seems to have married this woman who I think really kind of bit into him and transformed him into what she is. And of course, we're talking about Meghan Markle. And that is somebody whose only skill appears to be complaining and to some extent lying. I mean, what are actors but professional liars? But I mean, it really, it is confusing to me, and it's very woke in a sense to be endlessly ungrateful when you have every reason to be grateful for most aspects of your life. And that is what confuses me so much about Harry and Meghan, particularly Meghan, and I want to get to that in a second. But Harry, again, a genuine, very upsetting tragedy early in his life when his mother died. Right. But outside of that, born into an environment in which he's always going to have an audience. If Harry wanted to be a singer, an actor, a writer, who wrote things other than petty, gossipy books. If maybe he wrote fiction or something, anything he wanted to do, he was always going to have a built-in audience. So your self-actualization is kind of set up for you there. He's extremely wealthy, and he had the opportunity to marry probably almost anyone he wants. Who doesn't want to marry a prince? And he chose this actress who seems to immolate every relationship she touches, particularly with her in-laws, in record time, by the way. Almost as soon as they started dating in 2016, there seemed to be problems. And who, she is attractive. If you've seen Meghan Markle, she's a good-looking lady. To be honest, I don't find her as spectacularly attractive as most like A-list actresses. I get a little bit confused. Again, if you had every opportunity in the world to choose anyone, why you would choose Meghan Markle? Because her attractiveness seems to be pretty much her only positive quality. Her talent can even be called into question because, again, I've always been confused. People have said she's an actress. I've seen her one time because I watched the show The League, and she has like a bit part for 2 seconds on that show. And I didn't even know. My girlfriend had to say, "Is that Meghan Markle?" And I went, "Oh, I suppose it is." And she's on the show for one episode. Other than that, I've never seen her in anything. Again, I understand she was on this show Suits that I had never heard of until I looked up her filmography. But congrats to her on that. That seems to have been a pretty big credit. Other than that, Harry chose this random good-looking actress lady when I've always wondered. And by the way, she is also 3 years older than him, which is not out of this world crazy age difference. My girlfriend is 1 year older than me. But again, most guys given endless opportunity often go with women that are a bit younger than them or about the same age. So I guess I always wonder why Harry might not have, I don't know, tried to woo someone like a Scarlett Johansson, who is actually closer to him in age, in my opinion, more attractive than Meghan Markle. I know that's somewhat subjective, but and who is much more well respected by the public. And, you know, Scarlett Johansson is just an example, but if he's into actresses, and lots of people are, I don't blame him for that. They have a tendency to be very good-looking ladies actresses. there were so many other choices. I just am truly baffled as to why he chose Meghan. And I do want to take a second, and this is taking a little bit from Matt Walsh's take on this particular topic, but I want to take a second to say, don't marry someone like Meghan Markle. If there is somebody who clearly is preying on your insecurities, and I think that had something to do with how these two people got together, and they don't respect your family, especially when your family is a fairly prestigious and classy family, if you will, don't marry that person, especially if you have so many other options. But anyway, I'll end this by saying the main thing that Harry seems to have gotten out of his relationship with Meghan is drama and trouble and a sense of perpetual aggrievement. Because she definitely comes off, any interview you watch with her, she's just complaining. And she's lying in the process. But more than anything, she's complaining. And it seems like she basically hooked into this guy, was given an opportunity again to have this amazing life, to be a princess. I don't know exactly how it works. I guess she's a duchess, she's not, or something. But to be more or less a princess, to be closer to a princess than any woman could really ever dream of being. There's lots of women who'd like to be princesses. To be given access to a spectacular amount of wealth and prestige. And she immediately, I think in record time, ruined all of those relationships with her in-laws, and now just complains all the time. And it reminds me very much of how, I don't think it's uniquely generational. People always say it's the millennials. Sure, there's lots of millennials who are this way. There's lots of millennials who aren't. But people these days in general seem to complain even when their lives overall are pretty good. And they seem to not understand the fact, as Jordan Peterson has talked about so many times, that everyone has a cross to bear. Harry bears the cross of his mother's death, and I sympathize with him for that. He bears the cross of playing second fiddle to his brother, the heir to the throne. And I sympathize with him a little bit on that. I understand how that could negatively impact you psychologically. But at the end of the day, save perhaps for his mother's untimely death, his cross to bear would seem pretty small put into the context of his broader life. And this is something that wokeness teaches you not to think about. It teaches you not to think about the time you're born, which is a time of endless privation and advanced medicine, very little physical suffering compared to ages past, a time of relative peace and prosperity. Most people alive today should feel lucky to be alive and not complain like this. And this kind of perpetual aggrievement, I think it's worth talking about it when it seems to have taken its most spectacularly, it seems to have produced one of its biggest spectacles of all time, which is a literal prince and a princess, literal fairy tale people who live in a literal fairy tale. Meghan Markle particularly, again, because she married into a C-list actress, married into the royal fucking family, and is complaining.
It's almost satire, Scott. Like this is almost satire of where wokeness hits its peak. Is you have, I mean, you can make an argument of some of the most two of the most privileged human beings in the entire world, yet they either have to be the oppressed or the oppressor, and nobody likes the oppressor, so they have to say they are the oppressed. That's just how this game is played, because otherwise, they're the bad guys. And so if they're going to stand on top of moral righteousness, they have to find an oppressed narrative. And basically what seems to have happened here is they destroyed their lives, and then now they're oppressed. Yay, we have something to complain about. That seems to be exactly what's going on here. And it really is almost satirical to listen to the people that have this much money, this much fame, this much notoriety, talking about how they're, downtrodden? Please.
It reeks of people who don't have anything else to offer. I mean, Meghan, maybe she felt she was on the way to failing as an actress, and Harry, it seems like he was a pretty good pilot in the Air Force, which I give him lots of credit for, but I don't really know of anything else notable that he's done other than, and get all the credit in the world for piloting attack helicopters in the Middle East. But other than that, it seems like, I guess he was only able to kill so many people from an Apache. And I guess that wasn't the most sustainable skill for a member of the royal family. Yeah. That seems to have been the one thing he tried that he was pretty good at. And it actually is kind of cool. Like, I give him all the credit in the world. It's one of the reasons I think this is so sad is he was good at something, even if it was killing terrorists in an Apache helicopter, but it's something.
Yeah.
But other than that, he never seems to have, to my knowledge, produced anything other than embarrassment for his family. I mean, even before he met Meghan Markle, he seemed to have some behavioral issues. He was caught at costume parties wearing a Nazi armband, which has been offensive for a while. That's one where I don't think you could do Nazi armband even before
No.
the whole Yale Halloween costume controversy kind of kicked off the cultural appropriation thing. He also blames that on Prince William. I don't know the exact details of that, but he says something about them putting him up to it. I guess I can't speak to the veracity of those claims. Maybe somebody did put him up to it, but I know that he wore the costume something like 7 times. So you'd think he would have known better. But yeah, you can. I can see, Ben, you're looking it up now. Anyone who wants to see it, just look up Prince Harry Nazi, and he's just wearing a Nazi armband to a costume party, and again blames his brother.
Yeah.
But in any case, again, this is such a good example of what wokeness does to culture, because it takes people who feel that they don't have anything to offer. And this seems to be a big part of Harry's psychology. Remember, he's been told that when he was a kid, like, all you are is a spare part. That's what he's claiming. And let's take that at face value. And it probably made him feel like he didn't have a whole lot to offer. And when you don't have anything else to offer, what do? You lie, manipulate, and play the victim. And it's what so many people do. How many people do we know that are famous because they complain all the time, particularly in the world of political activism? Like, what does Nicole Hannah-Jones do for this country as a philosopher, as a writer, as a political activist? Nothing but destroy. All they do is destroy. And what have Meghan and Harry done? Destroyed. They've destroyed their reputation, to some extent their family's reputation, at a particularly bad time because they just lost their matriarch. And I know that we don't usually cover like celebrity gossip type stories on this show, but this one feels different because of the severity of the situation. It feels like the climax of this story. I think this might be peak ridiculousness when it comes to the Harry and Meghan saga. Like, this is their swan song as professional complainers. I don't know where they go from here. They are shooting their load, for lack of a better term. This is what they've got. This is all the dirt they've got. This book is exhaustive. It seems to be all the dirt Prince Harry has on his family. And Meghan Markle, of course, played the race card, which is like the ultimate. That's all she's got. And I don't know where they go from here. I felt like we could cover this story and connect it to everything else that's going on, because I think this is it. I think this is the ultimate embarrassment for the royal family, and particularly for these two people.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is like the postmodern leading to woke ideology is all about this deconstruction of everything. And when everything is deconstructed and in shambles and in ruins, the people who took it down don't know how to build anything back up. And these people don't know how to build anything back up. I mean, what does a royal do all day? I mean, they like go. Do they do diplomacy things? I don't know what marketable skills come out of these people, but once all of the complaints come down and they're sitting in their house in California and the plants are watered by the servants or whatever, what's the next thing? Are they going to get an office job? Like, I just don't know where I agree. I don't know where they go from here because I don't know what they can do. And I'm sure things that they could do, they find themselves too dignified to actually do.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. They seem to feel like they're above so much, and yet you look at Prince Harry now, especially when you compare him to the man that he was, a man that, again, did pilot like Apache attack helicopters at one point. That's pretty cool. And he just seems like a broken man. And it's so, I mean, you watch an interview with the two of them and he's so utterly henpecked. I mean, look, I try not to do too many like body language videos on YouTube. I don't do a lot of them. The last time I really fell into that was when Christine Blasey Ford gave her, in my opinion, probably false, like almost certainly false testimony in the Kavanaugh thing. And I couldn't help myself but watch some of these body language videos. But I got a little bit back into it with Meghan and Harry. And you can see how he just defers to her. Any joint interview, there's so much body language of her sort of nodding, like, yes, you can say that or say this or say that thing I told you to say. And him sort of looking at her for approval so much of the time. And it does make me think that what we effectively have at the end of the day is a very insecure man, but a very promising young man, a man who had the ability to, again, fly attack helicopters, a man who was born into a family that probably taught him some degree of etiquette and self-respect on some level. I'm sure they weren't that nasty to him. I understand they were a little nasty to him at times, and I'm sure that they were, but they probably still taught him a little bit about self-respect. He's a fucking prince. Like, how insecure can you be when you're a prince?
Yeah.
But he does seem insecure. And we have this very toxic woman coming into his life completely out of left field. Like, this would be like dating a girl who has not a particularly good reputation from a school you don't even go to. She's from the United States. And it seems like she kind of sunk her teeth into him. And I think it's a great example of toxic femininity. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit too, because we hear a lot about toxic masculinity. For what it's worth, I'll say this on the show. I do think there is something that you could call toxic masculinity. I think that to say there is no such thing as that would actually not be correct. I think there is something in the world you could say is toxic masculinity, something akin to, there's a group of friends and maybe four of them like football. And then one of them says like, hey guys, I'm going to miss the game this week. I'm actually going to be, at a dance recital because I want to become a dancer. And then they all say like, oh, well, you're fucking gay. Like, that's kind of toxic masculinity, not supporting your friend's desire to do something a little different or something that might be seen as slightly more feminine. The sort of beer drinking, farting, which, look, I like drinking beer and farting and watching football as much as the next guy. But if you don't allow other men around you to have a different way of living their life, you could call that toxic masculinity, right? Or, it could be the fact that men have a tendency to they often don't go to the hospital when they really should. A lot of men die early because they don't address certain health problems that they're experiencing. That's toxic. You don't want to die when you're 48 because you never did anything about the fact that you're constantly like bleeding from your eyeballs or whatever. Like the men will just like, oh, my arm fell off. I guess I'll just deal with it. These can be good things if you look at them through a different lens or in a different context, but in a lot of cases they're not. So I do think toxic masculinity can be a thing. I will say most masculine traits are not toxic and most masculine men are not toxic. That's where it becomes a problem, is that now we're being told that all masculinity is toxic. That is what is so bad about that term, is that it's used in a particularly bad way. But I want to talk about toxic femininity because, oh boy, does Meghan Markle, like textbook, they should put her in a book about toxic femininity. Holy crap. If any of you haven't seen, watch some interviews with this lady. And if she doesn't ooze a certain energy to you, it means you haven't met a certain type of woman. And let me tell you, I have. I've met a lot of women like Meghan Markle in my day. When I was in college, I knew a lot of women like Meghan Markle. I have met many, many women like her. Very calculating, very manipulative. Everything they say, completely rehearsed. Everything they say is to a certain ends. They're miserable people. They don't have a lot of fun. And that's because they're constantly trying to get another pound of flesh out of someone or make another move in their career. Just such an utterly manipulative person. Anyway, that's my view. Ben, what do you think? Is Meghan Markle toxically feminine? I think my opinion is pretty clear. But in what ways does she maybe exemplify that, if you think she does?
Yeah, so I'm with you. I kind of want to object to this term just a little bit, and it's not because I don't think it exists, because it does. I think toxic masculinity exists. I think your description of it was right. I mean, people like Andrew Tate exist, and the guy who has his own gallon jug and is screaming during every back squat at the gym, that guy sucks. But we don't really need these terms. We didn't need the term toxic masculinity because we have a lot of terms that actually did a really good job of explaining that. We called people assholes or douchebags or dicks. So I don't like the term just because it seems to be this like medicalization, symptomization of everything is just kind of a natural phenomenon in the world. I don't know enough about Meghan Markle to give an excess. Now, getting back to the point, to the extent that toxic femininity exists, I am not super familiar with Meghan Markle enough to say that. That seems to be the way it is, at least the way I've portrayed. I can say I've seen this before. I had a friend when I was in high school that I kind of thought he was like this underground badass. He would tell me these stories about how he like did drugs and got into all these cool situations. And I was super green at the time. I believed him. These days I'm a little more skeptical, but we got to college. Within 4 months, he had this girlfriend. And then they went into a bunch of credit card debt to get a condo. It's like this really nice condo. And we would hang out there, and she would text him from upstairs while we were downstairs, like, you guys are being too loud. Can you bring me something? And we just eventually stopped hanging out because like she so monopolized his time. And I agree with you. There's a measure of manipulation here. And there's also, and this is probably not going to be very popular, but there's also this isolating aspect that you actually see is very common in domestic violence situations. I'm not saying that's what's going on here. I don't want to hear about it in the comments, but there is a very common phenomenon in abusive relationships where you attempt to isolate someone from their friends and family. And that seems to be a feature of what's going on here. That it's just the type of relationship that ruins guys. And I agree. I think Harry's probably a pretty insecure guy. And females like Meghan Markle finds an attractive girl who likes them, and she can do that manipulation. And then you move from having kind of a masculine characteristics to what you do is you're just catering. You're just catering. And don't get me wrong, when you commit yourself to another person, you should provide comfort and support, provide for them, but you have to maintain your independence. And that doesn't see what's being going on here at all. I don't see Harry as an independent person based on what I've read.
Yeah, I think I think it's interesting what you said, by the way, about perhaps the framing of toxic masculinity and toxic femininity. It does maybe unnecessarily inject gender or sex into these traits that you could just call toxic, or you could just call manipulative, or whatever you want to call it. But this relationship is so interesting. I mean, I bet you, if my read of Meghan and Harry is right, and I feel also that I've known couples like that, I bet you the first 6 months of their relationship was awesome for Harry.
Yeah.
He probably had a great time. I bet you that she was saying all the right things, just really making him feel understood, a lot of nodding, a lot of, oh my God, you're so right. Yes, they did treat you that way. And I'm sure that the sex wasn't bad either, as it so often is pretty good, especially for the first few months of a new relationship when everything's new and exciting, especially with an attractive lady like Meghan Markle, an actress, right? Who doesn't want to sleep with an actress? And I'm sure he was having a great time. But over time, I feel like you see some of the faces he's making in this Netflix series when she's talking, when she's saying that like she couldn't be bothered to curtsy for the Queen of England, that was like, that made her feel like an asshole to curtsy for the Queen of England. You know how many women have a dream, and that dream is to one day curtsy for the Queen of England?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
I'd even like to do it, honestly.
Yeah, I would. That would be kind of a cool. If I could have curtsied for Queen Elizabeth, I guess we would bow. But in any case,
same.
But
who knows these days? I identify as a curtsier.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah. But it's like this is. It's so strange, and I wonder if he has a sort of, because you can see the look on his face in that excerpt where she's like, "Oh, I was asked to curtsy, and it was so ridiculous," and it's like, is this a sunk cost fallacy thing? Because I think he has realized, as the relationship has deteriorated into the level of harm that it's done to his family, to him psychologically. And I've seen this in men before, especially men who are married, and especially men who've been married for several, especially they do have a child together, at least one that I know of, Archie. And there's a certain sunk cost fallacy that you get. And this is common in a lot of, especially marriages, where you're like, God, if I back out of this now, I have to get divorced. If you're a man, you probably lose a lot of money. Harry would probably lose an awful lot of money if he got divorced. And, I'm speculating here, but I wonder if there's a certain sunk cost fallacy that goes into Harry's continuing this relationship that has done nothing but destroy his reputation and that of his family. It baffles me why he continues to be with this person. I don't know every aspect of their relationship. Maybe she's great to be around. I've never been in a room with Meghan Markle, so I can only speak to it so much. But that is my read of the situation. And I would encourage people, especially guys going out there into the world, like, if you meet someone like Meghan Markle, be really careful. Because the reason that I use a term like toxic femininity is women have a higher emotional IQ than men, generally speaking. They're very good at understanding other people's emotions, empathizing with them. It's a great thing about women. It's usually a positive trait, but it also means that should they wish to emotionally manipulate someone, especially a man, men usually having lower emotional IQs than women, they can do a damn good job of it. And it is triple so if they're attractive. Attractive women know that their capacity to emotionally manipulate men is endless. It is a superpower. If you're a good-looking lady, especially if you're under the age of 30, you have got superpowers. And it is something that I think is somewhat uniquely feminine, again, because there's that emotional manipulation. Men can emotionally manipulate other men, but it's fairly uncommon, I feel like. Usually if a man is going to hurt another man, it's going to be because he punches him in the face. Also not a good thing. there's some toxic masculinity, if you will, if we are going to use those terms.
Yeah.
Don't punch people in the face. But yeah, I find this situation a lot more interesting than I did not that long ago, just because it has this memoir is nuts. Again, I encourage you all to look up the clip of him talking about the cream that he put on his penis. It is one of the it is in probably the top 10 strangest things I've ever heard a human voluntarily say ever. I could not believe a person put this in a book and that no one told him to take it out. The ghostwriter didn't tell him to take it out. Meghan didn't tell him to take it out. Apparently, there were a lot of people, editors, people who looked at this and said, let's keep this thing about you putting the cream that reminds you very much of your mother onto your penis.
Yeah. I think that I read in that, and the Wikipedia article we kind of used as a basis for informing ourselves here, that this book was originally 800 pages and got cut down to 400. And that didn't get cut down in the editing process.
Oh my God. Let's keep in the thing about you putting your mom's cream on your penis.
Yeah, that seems like that's totally, that's part of this story. Everyone around the world needs to know. I think I also said it's been translated into 16 languages.
It's selling really well.
Oh,
I mean,
I'm
people
sure
want to know, and I get it. But it seems like, I mean, you're gonna. This is such a short-term gain, long-term disaster for Prince Harry, and for his poor little son Archie, and whatever Meghan and Harry have in future for their family. This is such a bad move, even though it will make them a lot of money in the meantime. And the idea that they need money sounds particularly ridiculous. I know they're no longer like royalty rich because they're not technically royals,
Right.
but I looked it up, and I don't think they are hurting in the cashola department. I think they're doing pretty good. I think they can afford to do whatever it is they need to do to take care of their children and have some degree of generational wealth still.
Yeah, I mean, generally, once you reach a certain threshold of money, that money basically prints other money, and I'm sure they're past that threshold.
It's like $10 million or more, and it's like you're shut the fuck up. like if you're saying that you need money, just shut the fuck up.
Yeah. Just give it to somebody at Goldman Sachs, and they will go defraud some Greek city state and turn it into 20 million.
Exactly. Some official financial advice from Ben Rubel. No, I'm kidding. From Ben Rubel to our listeners. But in any case, I don't want to beat a dead horse too much. I think we've said a lot of what we could say on this issue. I don't think we're going to have to talk about it too much again. I think this is kind of the last chapter for them. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe something else will happen that's even more ridiculous. This seems like the sort of shooting of the load, if you will, in my very poetic terms, as I always put things. For the Harry and Meghan tragedy. But Ben, you look like you want to jump in before we move on.
I think that's the case. I mean, look at what happened. I mean, didn't the Obamas try to start some like podcast entertainment thing, and that failed almost immediately? So it seems to me, if American icons such as the Obama family can't continue to create something that people want to consume, I don't see how these two people do. Maybe in other countries, maybe in the UK. And we do have some weird obsession with the royal family in this country, even though we kicked their asses 250 years ago to get away from them. So maybe they do, but it seems to me that this is not something that has staying power, especially if it's just continuation of the same stuff they've already been doing.
It seems like if you're going to do the family drama reality TV show kind of thing, you have to go all in with the dysfunction and the humiliation and the ridiculousness and the self-deprecation. So like the Kardashians are a great example where they are just like, you've got Kim Kardashian crying because one of her earrings fell into the ocean. And, you know, she's forever associated with just being this utterly ungrateful, annoying, kind of whiny person who has moved away from that a little bit as she's aged, because she's like 40 now. So she can only keep that up for so long. And she's a somewhat sympathetic figure because it turns out her ex-husband is a raging lunatic and anti-Semite. But that's kind of neither here nor there. But yeah, I mean, it sort of seems like the Obamas, it's like, okay, so you're like, I mean, look, get all the credit to them. They seem like a pretty healthy, happy family. Who the fuck wants to listen to a podcast about that? I don't even know if that was exactly what the podcast was about, but I remember them trying to do something and being like, you know, Obama's an interesting guy, and I'd probably watch maybe like a documentary about his life, but his family, I don't give a shit. I've never given a shit about the first lady. Who the fuck cares about the first spouse? Unless they do something real wacky. It's like they weren't elected to anything. They don't technically have to do anything. But anyway, there's another story that we wanted to talk about today. something more directly associated with the culture war. Our boys, Ron DeSantis and Chris Rufo, are at it again, folks. They've done it again. I love these guys. I do. Ben, I know you're not quite as fond
I
of
wouldn't
the
say hour, maybe like
maybe
yours and
mine,
a half.
more so mine. Yeah, mine
yours
and a
half.
But these are my boys, and they've done it again. Again, look, I want to make one thing clear. I don't think that Ron DeSantis and Chris Rufo are going to ride over the hill like Gandalf and the cavalry in Lord of the Rings at the Battle of Rohan, or was it Gondor? Battle of Gondor. And I want to make sure I get my nerd references right.
I'm not touching that shit on
people
YouTube.
Will be making fun of me in the comments if I said Battle of Rohan. It's the Rohanian cavalry that goes to Gondor. I know my Lord of the Rings, I think. And if I got it wrong, now people are really going to make fun of me. But anyway, I don't think Chris Rufo and Ron DeSantis are going to ride over the hill like that and save us all and end the culture war and blow up the Death Star, if you will, for more nerd references. But I think that they're doing the closest thing to that you can really do, at least from my perspective. They're doing things. They're actually doing stuff. And even if it's not much, it is meaningful. So anyway, what they've done, for anyone that doesn't know, is Ron DeSantis has continued his kind of Florida is where woke goes to die thing that he's been doing, which I generally am pretty appreciative of. And he's appointed Chris Rufo, who he seems to be very, very close with at this point. It seems like Chris Rufo is often whispering in the ears of Ron DeSantis, and I'm not at all opposed to that. And I've already said on the show before that I'm supporting DeSantis in 2024. He's appointed Chris Rufo and some other sort of conservative activists and thinkers to the board of a college. What is it? The New College of Florida, which is
College of Florida.
Yeah, small public college, small public university or college in Florida that I think is known for being fairly woke, as most universities are at this point. And he has tasked them implicitly, and I think perhaps explicitly actually, with de-wokifying the school. And they're on the board of trustees now. I'm going to throw it to Ben in a second, because theoretically you'd think that they could actually start their way towards de-wokifying this institution and maybe spreading that out into other institutions. But I'm not super familiar with what you can do when you're on the board of trustees of a university. And I wanted to throw it to Ben for a second, our resident legal expert. I don't know how much of a legal aspect there is to this, but I let Ben sort of look into that before the show.
So there actually is a legal aspect, at least when it comes to public schools. I looked at a couple state statutes, and generally a board of trustees is going to have two purposes. They're managing the operations of a university, and then they're also managing the property, the donations, the gifts. And that's kind of where the trustee part of that is, because once you're overseeing a bunch of people's money, you can be a trustee for the university's trust account, right? So they take care of the money and the policy. Their board size seems to vary. At one of the state schools in my state, the number of trustees is 35. And they're often divided into various committees to take care of the multifaceted. So some of them may be more toward how do we manage our endowment? How do we manage, property stuff? And the others are more policy. But they're appointed in various ways. Again, for a lot of state schools, what you're going to have is some type of appointment process involving the governor or the legislature, maybe having to confirm that appointment. Sometimes the universities will just have their own people they elevate. So there are a lot of mixed stuff going on there. But basically, the board of trustees votes on policy and how to allocate resources is what they do.
Yeah. Well, it seems like, Florida, as we saw in the 2022 midterms, is like the People's Republic of Florida. It's utterly Republican dominated. I think the state legislature, the attorney general, every statewide office, they can kind of do these little experiments in being a completely different country almost. They're doing things that a lot of other Republican governors wouldn't dream of doing. The Republican governor of Utah actually has his pronouns, I think, in some of his social media, which is a hell of a thing. Spencer Cox, I want to say, is that guy's name. He sucks. But anyway, just to be a Republican and play footsies with that stuff is unreal. But
in Utah, that's very weird for Utah.
It's so unnecessary. I don't even think Mitt Romney has his pronouns in his bio. But anyway, this is really interesting because it seems like they have some power to manage the school. And it's a small school, which I think is smart, because it's like, if you're going to try this is almost like a pilot program. They're seeing what they can do. They're not able to do this nationwide, but maybe this can be replicated at some other public universities, probably not at any of the private ones, but some of the other public universities in Florida. And if Ron DeSantis wants to replicate this elsewhere, there's only so many Chris Rufos. I don't think Chris Rufo can be on the board of every public university in Florida, but if he wants to keep this up, I am all for it, because it effectively says, look, institutional capture is how we got into this predicament to begin with. The woke orthodoxy, if you will. I try not to say the left on this show too much, because it's not, left right isn't the best way to think of it. The woke orthodoxy, if you will, has been marching through our institutions at least for 20, 30 years. Some people would say 50, 60 years. And the conservatives kind of just let it happen. And I admonish conservatives for let's cut taxes. Let's do a lot of that and deregulate Wall Street and all that. And let's not actually focus on the culture too much and these cultural institutions. And let's just continually shit on them all the time on how stupid and liberal Hollywood and the media and academia is, without actually doing a single fucking thing about it. And this continued for decades and got us where we are. It got us into a terrible position where by the time people started to notice this, many of whom were liberals themselves, it was far too late. Which is something I want to get into in a bit, because it's baffling to me that this kind of stuff didn't begin at least 5 or 6 years ago. I mean, God, it's been clear what's been going on for a while. Mm-hmm. But finally, we have somebody who appears to be, in all likelihood, running for president, doing this stuff. And I'm pretty thrilled with it. I mean, I know, again, that we're not going to wake up tomorrow and have every college and university saying we stand for free expression and free speech, and will no longer be an overtly woke institution. That's not going to happen tomorrow. But if you were going to do that over time, this would be a great first step. And I really encourage people not to take the black pill on these issues and say that we shouldn't bother to do this stuff because it's too late and the left controls too much of the culture. Could that be correct? Yes, it could be. It could be. Maybe it's too late, but maybe it's not. And this sort of defeatist attitude that so many people take with accelerationism and other ideologies on the right, where they say that we just need to roll over and hope that the seeds of something better can grow out of the ruins of society. I don't like that. And I think that this is the best alternative.
Mm-hmm. No, see, this is kind of what I've been talking about. I mean, you and I kind of disagree about the desirability, the efficacy of passing legislation that applies state or nationwide to kind of fight the woke ideology. And I like to see something more like this happen, is to install people who can do good within an institution so they can try to transform those institutions. Now, there's still an aspect of state power here, and we'll see how this kind of comes down, because I'm not sure how effective it's going to be like, no professors teach DEI, whatever. I don't think that's going to work. But it's about fostering the culture of free speech. And what I really would like to see is if these people are going to be on boards, is they start giving administrators backbones. Because one of the biggest problems with university capture is that some random student complains about a professor maybe saying something insensitive that may not be insensitive at all, and they just suspend them, or they censure them, or whatever, just based upon some mild uproar. What I would like to see is boards becoming more free speech and pushing on administrators to start defending their faculty in favor of free speech.
I think you're absolutely right, Ben, that what this effectively does, and one of the reasons it's so important, is it gives the little guy a place to go if he's on the fence about implicitly or explicitly fighting against woke orthodoxy. Even if it's just, a student at a university who writes a paper about free expression, and their, professor says, well, the First Amendment isn't really a relevant document, and I'm actually going to fail you on this assignment because I don't think you understand the harm that free speech has done to Black and brown communities. And in an exceptionally woke environment, they would say, well, maybe that's not a nice way to grade papers, but this professor has free expression, even though that is absolutely, there's no way that you can grade papers that way. I know you have a pretty good amount of academic freedom in this country when you're a college professor, but that would be totally beyond the pale. Depending on maybe the specific context. This is a hypothetical, of course. But giving people a place to go where someone's in a position of power where they can help them is very important, because we see time and time again that people stay silent and don't do anything because they're like, what do I do if I come under attack? Who do I go to protect me? Brett Weinstein famously said in Mike Nana's excellent documentary, by the way,
good.
About the evergreen. The thing that I send people, if I'm only able to send, if I want to talk to somebody about wokeness and how it's a problem, and they say, you got one shot, send me one thing to watch, I send them Mike Nana's evergreen documentary.
Yep.
Mike Nana's Evergreen College documentary that I think it doesn't necessarily have a name. It's just sort of Mike Naina's Evergreen documentary. It has the 3 individual parts have names, but the thing itself doesn't really have a name, I don't think. But it's about the Evergreen College meltdown. It is excellent, excellent, excellent. I will recommend it to you more than almost anything else I've ever talked about on the show. And it's a great thing to send people if you want them to understand the kind of things that are going on with wokeness. But Brett Weinstein famously said, we couldn't go anywhere, Heather and I. We went to the deputy attorney general. We go to the police and they say, we can't protect you. We go to the administrators and they say, this is not a place to defend yourself. We go to our fellow college professors and they say, we cannot defend you for the sake of our own careers, even if we know that you're right.
Yep.
That is a recipe for disaster. And I fear what might have happened to Brett Weinstein had his situation precipitated a little later than it did, when things were even crazier than they were in 2017. And, and something really awful came very, very close to happening in June of 2017 at Evergreen College. Not that it wasn't that something awful had already happened. But when you do something like this, every student at the new College of Florida knows that they have a place to go. Every faculty member, like you said, Ben, they now have they can use their goddamn backbone. Everyone has a backbone, by the way. You can do this stuff and you should, but they can feel a little bit safer using their backbone and, sticking it to the woke orthodoxy. Should they do so by accident or should they wish to do so intentionally? And I would encourage people to do so. I'm kind of a provocateur. I'm like, yes, do it.
Yeah, so one other thing I'd really like to see, and that will be encouraged by this, is one way to fight against this is we need to dismantle the university bureaucracy. Every time I see statistics about the ratio of bureaucrats or DEI employees to people who are actually educating students, I'm just shocked. Barry Weiss's outlet, The Free Press, recently reported, and this is a quote, "The ranks of DEI vice presidents, deans, and officers are ever growing. Princeton has more than 70 administrators devoted to DEI. Ohio State has 132. They now take part in dictating things like hiring, promotion, tenure, and research funding." If universities had to be competitive on price, these types of things would be fixed. And that's another solution. That's why hopefully will happen. Like you see someone like Mitch Daniels at Purdue University in Indiana. He said, we're not raising tuition. We're going to have competence over conflict. We're going to create competent students at a low price, and we're going to stop with this administrative bloat. And people like Chris Rufo, I think, understand that. People who are like-minded to us understand that. And hopefully, I think the DEI stuff gets a little bit less power when we start dismantling the university bureaucracy.
Yeah. And DeSantis has really leaned into this. Another thing that he did, I think a little bit before appointing Rufo and these others to the new College of Florida board, is he did something where he sent out a letter basically asking every public university in Florida to report directly to his office, the office of the governor, what funds are going into their DEI apartments. He's basically auditing every DEI apartment at every public university in Florida. And I think it also said any funds that are used to teach any kind of critical theory, which would mean women's studies, Black studies, these grievance studies, which have been utterly, debunked and discredited through the work of James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose and Peter Boghossian and others. Mm-hmm. And this is very provocative and the kind of stuff that I really like, because I think the end game is that these things should be de facto defunded. And I think, Ben, you coming from a somewhat more libertarian perspective would want that to happen very organically. You would want the schools to feel that they are incentivized because they have to be competitive to sort of defund these institutions, not institutions, but these departments themselves. And I think that's a perfectly valid point. I'm feeling a little bit more aggressive these days, to where I think whatever efforts you could take to make these departments unsustainable financially, I am like, they say defund the police. I'm like, defund women's studies, defund gender studies, and defund Black studies, defund diversity, equity, and inclusion. Defund DEI. The DEI movement starts today. Defund diversity, equity, and inclusion, because it's a huge waste of money, and it's just been nothing but an indoctrination machine for decades now. And we know this, and by the way, it's something that should have happened a long time ago. Brett Weinstein, who I mentioned before, also says in the documentary, these ideas should not have been allowed to fester. It's one of my favorite things he's ever said because it so eloquently puts into words something that we all now know and should have known 30 years ago when intersectionality started to become a thing in these departments, is that these ideas were so clearly meant to subvert and destroy the best aspects of our society and to take the actual mission of every institution they touch and invert it to orbit around the selfish desires of these identity groups. Mm-hmm. Because journalists are no longer agents of truth, they're agents of the orthodoxy. Big tech is no longer an agent of social connection, it is an agent of the orthodoxy. Hollywood is no longer an agent of entertainment, it is an agent of the orthodoxy. Academia is no longer an agent of learning, it is an agent of the orthodoxy. None of these things do what they're supposed to fucking do. None of these institutions do what they are supposed to, what their stated goal is. And in some cases, they are changing their stated goal. The mission statements of these organizations change. Just say, we are much more concerned with diversity, equity, and inclusion than we are with truth, learning, entertainment, with social connection, whatever it might be. And I am glad that we are starting, even if it's a little late, I am glad that we are starting to address that directly. And I hope one day that these not just useless, but incredibly counterproductive departments at these universities and within other institutions are defunded. Obviously, it's going to be a lot more challenging with entirely private institutions. The news media is entirely privatized. The entertainment media is entirely privatized. Big tech is entirely privatized. But, we're starting at education because what better place to start than the place where it all kind of started, right, which was within the academy. And in a place where there is some public oversight, you actually do have a relationship with the government. Maybe at some point on the show, we'll have a discussion about what you could do in these other institutions that are entirely privatized, where it's much more challenging. I don't really know exactly how that would work. But I was glad to see this with Ron DeSantis and Chris Rufo. Glad to see you, Ben. Glad to talk to all of you in the audience. It's good to be back this year. I think we're starting off strong with some interesting stuff, and we'll continue to cover this stuff throughout the weeks and months as the year plays out. We look forward to seeing you next time. I do have some more music in the works for anyone who enjoyed the song I produced, New Religion, which you should all check out on the YouTube channel. I have another song in the works. And I'm also considering having some one-off interviews in the future. We're going to bring on hopefully some big guests, some of my biggest guests of all time on the Veritas Podcast. Not regularly, but we're going to have some one-offs, hopefully, with some guests as well. And thanks again for being with us. We'll see you next time on the Veritas Podcast.